Hello, I am Peter Okwacha. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. 12 militants are killed in Egypt. The government says they were trying to create an atmosphere of chaos in the country. It comes a day after an explosion in Cairo injured at least 17 people. 7 million Malawians are set to go to the polls. The country will use an electronic counting system for the very first time.
What most matter to me is job employment and the fight against corruption.
Also on the program, we visit a cafe in Nairobi staffed entirely by people living with a disability. And in sport, disappointment for Zamalek in the Africa Confederation Cup as they look to turn things around in the second leg. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. In Egypt, security forces have killed 12 suspected Islamist militants in Cairo. It comes a day after an explosion targeting a tourist bus injured at least 17 people. A device containing nails and pieces of metal detonated on the perimeter of the Grand Egyptian Museum near a bus carrying 25 South African tourists from the airport to the Pyramids district. The Interior Ministry did not say whether the suspected militants were connected to Sunday's attack, but claimed members of the militant group Hassan were planning a series of attacks in the country to create an atmosphere of chaos. Egypt is gearing up to host this year's Africa Cup of Nations, which starts next month. 24 countries are taking part in the competition, with fans expected to attend from all over the continent. Let's speak to our correspondent now, Sally Nabil, who is in Cairo, and she's just going to bring us an update on this. Sally, so the authorities claim that the militants are trying to create an atmosphere of chaos. What proof do they have?
Actually, yesterday's or last night's attack resulted in 17 injuries, among them 7 South Africans and 10 Egyptians. But the authorities here have hurried to confirm that all the injuries are minor and the wounded are in stable condition. They have been taken to nearby hospitals. No damage has been caused to the historic site in which the explosion took place. Apparently, the authorities here, they want to send a message of assurance worldwide, because Egypt is hosting the AFCON next month, and also because the location in which the blast took place is quite strategic. It's the most important landmark in the country. Every tourist who comes to Cairo has to visit the Great Pyramids. This is where the explosion took place. So it's a very negative message behind these attacks, and this is why the authorities have hurried to confirm that everything is under control.
And Sally, you mentioned that Africa Cup of Nations tournament, which begins in just about a month's time. Are we seeing increased security in the country or around the venues because of this attack?
The security deployments are yet to begin, but everybody is so excited about the AFCON. Egypt takes pride in hosting this great sports event, especially that it has won a record of 7 titles in the AFCON, and also the regime takes pride in security levels. I mean, if Egypt was not a stable country, it wouldn't have managed to host the AFCON, and this is why yesterday's attacks raises a lot of questions about how adequate the security measures are in place. They have not deployed extra security personnel around the venues yet, but the authorities have been promoting the idea that Egypt is a stable country, not just for the teams, but also for the spectators who will be coming from all over the continent. And this is why they tried to erase all the negative impact that yesterday's attack might have.
Okay, Sally, thank you very much. My colleague Sally Nabil speaking to us there from the Egyptian capital. Cairo. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo's main opposition leader, Moise Katumbi, has returned to the country after 3 years of self-imposed exile. Thousands of people lined the streets of Katanga province to welcome him back. Mr. Katumbi fled the country in 2016 after falling out with former President Joseph Kabila. He was later sentenced to 36 months in prison for illegally selling a property. 9 people have been confirmed dead and dozens more are still missing after a boat capsized in western Kenya on Sunday. The boat was carrying more than 50 football players and fans from western Uganda district of Hoima. Witnesses say overloading and bad weather are likely to blame for the accident as rescue attempts continue. A court in South Africa is deciding whether to drop corruption charges against the country's former president, Jacob Zuma. Mr. Zuma is accused of accepting bribes in the late 1990s as part of a multi-billion-dollar defense deal. He denies the charges against him, which include fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. And the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has hosted a fundraising dinner where guests paid more than $170,000 per person. Around 200 people attended the event at Menelik Palace. It's part of an effort to raise $1 billion for infrastructure projects in Addis Ababa. Now, there's just hours to go until polls open in Malawi's 5th general election since the country gained democracy in 1994. Nearly 7 million Malawians will have the chance to vote for a new president. 7 candidates will be on the ballot paper for the presidential election, but only 3 have a realistic chance of winning. They are Peter Mutharika from the Democratic Progress Party. He's the current president and is running for a second term. Lazarus Chakwera is from the Malawi Congress Party. He's hoping to revive the fortunes of the former ruling party. And Saulos Chilema, the country's current vice president, is running against his boss on behalf of the UTM party. Well, this election is the first time Malawi is introducing electronic transmission of results from over 5,000 polling stations. The BBC's Emmanuel Ligunza now reports.
I'm in the south of Malawi, quite near the border with Mozambique. Majority of the 7 million voters who've registered to participate in this year's elections live in rural places like this one. In the past, the Electoral Commission has struggled with issues such as access, but this time round, they've chosen to do things a bit differently. On the ground, election officials are making final preparations. It's a slow but meticulous process to ensure that all voting materials are in order, from the ballot boxes to final voter registers and the ballot papers that will be used on Tuesday. Frank Kandu has taken part in all Malawi elections since the country held a referendum on a multi-party system in 1993. But this is the first time he registered using a biometric system. His details, which were captured electronically, will be verified before he casts his vote.
2014 it was cumbersome, but this time around what was happening is you go to register for voting. Within a minute or two you have your voter's certificate.
He is also able to check his polling station on his mobile phone beforehand. A survey by the country's communication authority found 85% of Malawians own a mobile phone. Like previous elections, the actual voting will be paper-based. But the Electoral Commission will, however, transmit and tally the votes electronically in a bid to overcome irregularities witnessed in the counting of votes in the 2014 polls.
We have independent auditors that will audit the aggregates and verify that the additions are correct. And then after that, that's when the technology comes in. That's when these tallied results will be scanned and transmitted to the National Tally Center.
Some critics point out that the system failed in countries like Kenya in the 2017 elections. Ghana also encountered problems in 2016, forcing voting to be extended. The National Initiative for Civic Education has a center in Blantyre where they'll be checking progress on voting day. They created an application to be used by monitors.
There's a lot that happens around the election process. We need to monitor the procedures around identification of voters, whether women were allowed to vote or the disabled were given access to vote, or indeed whether polling stations were open on time, whether some people were not allowed to vote for certain reasons, and so many other things such as violence or harassment or hate speech.
The Electoral Commission says it's determined to deliver a free and credible election using technology. But if that fails, it concedes that they will revert to the tried and tested way of manual transmission. Emmanuel Igunza, BBC News, Mulanje, South Malawi.
Well, let's get more on this story now. The BBC's Larry Mcdougal joins us now from Lilongwe, and do bear with us, there's a slight delay on the line. Larry, I'd just like to touch on that last point made by Emmanuel about the effectiveness of these electronic voting machines. I mean, we've seen technology fail in several African countries in the past, most recently in Nigeria. How confident is the Electoral Commission that they won't have problems?
So, Peter, the Electoral Commission has been saying that they're confident this will work, but also pointing out and sort of trying to manage expectations that if they do fail, there's just electronic transmission of votes, that the actual voting is paper-based, and even then, when the results are getting transmitted, they will also be trying to get the actual paper results back, at least the form that summarizes all that, back to Blantyre, where its tallying center is. So, in a sense, trying to warn people that this might be a new development, but there are backups in case that fails, like has happened in Nigeria and Kenya, which we've covered. Then they have all of that covered.
And Larry, what about the youth vote? They were meant to make an impact in several African countries this year, and not quite so. What about in Malawi?
So more than half of the people between 18 to 34 those who are registered to vote in this election are between 18 and 34, that is. And so it's been a big campaign issue in this election. In fact, the vice president who's running against his boss, his wife has been putting out rap songs. He's trying to paint himself as the candidate who really gets the youth vote. And a lot of them are looking to see what will happen here, because a lot of people in this country, 80% live in rural areas. Many of them are looking for jobs. They don't have it. And they're hoping that whoever is elected next, whether it's President Mutharika or Chilima or Chakwera, they will begin to create policies that will make more jobs for them. And so far, everybody we've been speaking to here in Lilongwe, but across the country, tell us poverty is a major issue for them. The national poverty line is about 50%. More than half of the people can barely make a living. And they're the young people of this country that are hoping when they go to the polls tomorrow that they will elect somebody who will understand that and will make it a lot better.
And as you mentioned, there are just a few hours to these elections. What's the atmosphere like in the country?
There is excitement among a lot of people. They're looking forward to vote. They have already, many of them, made up their minds. And there's something that we're now starting to see as a trend across a lot of the elections. I was covering the Nigerian election a couple of months ago in February, just came from South Africa covering that as well. And the Electoral Commission finished the press conference today, the chair saying, don't fall prey to fake news. The misinformation, especially spreading on social media, on platforms like WhatsApp, is very big here, and it's something that's been warned against. The other one is some parties claiming there might be rigging, and the Electoral Commission again going out of its way to say that's not going to happen. And finally, there's been also rumors circulating again on social media that the internet might be shut down, and the regulators of the communications authority here, as well as the Electoral Commission, again telling people that's not likely to happen. There might be congestion on the network, but it should be fine. The government has no plans to shut down the internet or to limit social media, to limit or to curtail the spread of misinformation. So everybody looking forward to see what happens tomorrow when they go to the polls.
Okay, Larry Mcdougal speaking to us live there from Lilongwe. Thank you very much. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come, Mimi with the sports. In the NBA playoffs, a win for Cameroon's Pascal Siakam as the Toronto Raptors beat the Bucks. I'm Peter Okwoche. The top stories this hour. Officials in Egypt are warning militants are trying to create an atmosphere of chaos in the country. It comes a day after an explosion on a bus in Cairo injured at least 17 people. And 7 million Malawians are set to go to the polls tomorrow. It's the first time the country is using electronic transmission of results. Saudi Arabia says it has deposited $250 million in Sudan's central bank as part of a support package for the country, which is in the midst of an economic and political crisis. Price rises were the trigger for countrywide protests, which began in December and led to the overthrow of President Omar al-Bashir last month. Our senior Africa correspondent Ann Soy reports.
Duty to country and to religion. It is Ramadan, but that has not stopped these protesters from coming here day and night to carry on with the revolution. They say it is not yet over, and they have vowed to stay here outside the military headquarters until they are sure that Sudan is under civilian leadership. And that has been the main bone of contention during talks, because the Transitional Military Council would like to have a majority in the Sovereign Council, the top decision-making body that will be running the country for a transition period of 3 years. But then the protesters and opposition groups say that it has to be a civilian body. They have to have a majority. But they're also wary of external interests in this revolution. And when they receive money from Saudi Arabia, for instance, that has raised eyebrows here. They say this revolution is Sudanese, and it must remain so.
People who live with disabilities often struggle to find work, and unemployment rates are low globally. And in Africa, there are significant differences between the countries. For instance, in South Africa, the rate of disabled people who are employed is as low as 30%, while in Malawi, it's as high as 92%. Now, one project, a cafe in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, is trying to change attitudes. We went to meet one of the waiters who works there.
When the clients come in, we usually use writing for those who don't know sign language. And then I take their order and give it to the chef. And if there are people who know sign language, then we just use directly. We communicate through sign language. And also I teach them a bit of sign language, how to say hello and welcome. And most of them have the interest. So as they progress, they learn sign language. And by doing that, we influence them, and also they remember, and they always also go and talk to other people and tell them about the experience that they meet at Palais Cafe, so that they come here also. Okay, outside there for deaf people, I know they face a lot of challenges, and most of them also, they tell me that since I'm working here, they want to also come for me to help them to get employment. In the future, I want to get the skills and also become independent and open opportunities. And the experience that I get here, I will keep it and learn. And then when I'm independent out there, I can, open something like this, and also open a cafe where the deaf will be the ones who are managing it.
Very inspiring stuff. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi, what have you got for us?
A lot of football, Peter. As I said, we begin with football, where Zamalek will be hoping to turn their fortunes around. Their coach, Christian Gross, says he was disappointed his Egyptian side conceded an injury time goal in the first leg of the African Confederation Cup final. Host Renaissance Berkane dominated Sunday's game in Morocco, with Togo's Kojo Laba in the 94th minute with the winner. Laba is now the leading scorer in the tournament this season with 8 goals. The second leg will take place this coming Sunday just outside Alexandria in Egypt. And let's go to Turkey, where Algeria's Sofiane Feghouli and Nigeria's Henry Onyekuru both scored for Galatasaray as they beat Istanbul Başakşehir 2-1 to retain the Turkish league title. It completed the domestic double for them. After the win, Onyekuru wrote on his social media page, "Champions, we fought back from 1-0 in a very tough game. I am so blessed to have a strong team of Lions with me to battle back." DR Congo's Christian Luyendama, Senegal's Baye Ndiaye, and Morocco's Younes Belhanda also all played a part in Sunday's win. To the NBA, Cameroon's Pascal Siakam had 25 points and 11 rebounds as his Toronto Raptors pulled one back against the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Bucks, who led the series 2-0, forced the game into overtime before the score was leveled with just 2 seconds to go in Ontario. But the big difference between the sides was Kawhi Leonard. He scored 36 points, including 8 in the second overtime. Interceptions were key during the game, Raptors winning 118 to 112. Game 4 takes place on Tuesday.
Says everything. It says everything, and I think we kind of like try every night to, and you know, even when we have bad games that we don't play as well as we want to. I think one thing that you can always count on is, you know, for us to come back and as a team to play stronger and give everything that we got, you know. And I think that's just the mentality that we have as a group. We're going to continue to fight every single night and just go out there and let it out on the floor and you know, and at the end of the day, we're going to live with the results, you know, because we know how much work we put in and we know how, you know, how bad we want it and it just continued to show every single night, and you know, we just want to take this. It was a hard victory, but we're going to take it, and then next game, trying to get another one.
And to some breaking news in the last few minutes, Asamoah Gyan has posted a statement on his social media page that he is retiring from the Ghana national team ahead of the Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt next month. He hinted that the captaincy would be taken away from him and given to another player. That's it. That's back to you.
That old rivalry rears its head again. Thank you very much, Vivi. Next to Lake Malawi now, where a conservation group is working to protect the vast food, freshwater and employment resource. But it's a race against time as fish stocks have severely depleted in recent years. Force Ngwira works for the conservation group Ripple Africa. He told us about the challenge Malawi faces.
This is the mosquito net, which is used for fishing, but it was donated for malaria prevention, and we found that they were catching baby fish. So we said something must be done here. We have helped communities to come up with local bylaws, so when a fisherman is found using illegal fishing gear, including mosquito net, the net are confiscated, destroyed, and they pay fine, which goes back to the community. My hope for this project is to restore back the fish that we have has depleted in Lake Malawi. If fish is restocked, Malawi will benefit a lot because there will be more money coming to the country, there will be more food coming to the country, and more Malawians will be employed.
And finally, to a story that a lot of us in the office have been talking about all day. A group of college students in Atlanta in the United States had the surprise of their lives at graduation. Robert F. Smith, one of America's most prominent black philanthropists, was speaking at Morehouse College when he announced he would pay off the student debt of those graduating. Nearly 400 students will benefit at a cost of tens of millions of dollars. Here he is making the pledge.
On behalf of the 8 generations of my family who have been in this country, we're going to put a little fuel in your bus. Now, I've got the alumni over there, and this is the challenge to you alumni. This is my class, 2019. And my family is making a grant to eliminate their student loans. I know my class will make sure they pay this forward.
Well, congratulations to all of them. That's it on Focus on Africa from me, Peter Okoche. Thanks for watching.